The night I became a ghost in someone else's war, I was wearing white. I remember the cold before I remember the fear. It was the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin. Climbed inside you. Sat in your bones. Stole your breath one shallow pull at a time. Snow had started as a soft dusting when I ran from St. Matthew's Cathedral, but by the time I reached the edge of the city, it was falling in hard, slanting sheets, needling my face, clinging to the lace of my dress, turning silk into ice against my legs. My heels were long gone. I'd kicked them off somewhere between the church steps and the alley behind the florist's shop, and now my bare feet slapped against frozen pavement, numb enough that I only felt the sharp sting when I stepped on gravel. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. Not to the flowers. Not to the vows. Not to Victor Kane standing at the altar with that calm smile that never reached his eyes. People always said a bride should feel nervous on her wedding day. Butterflies. Tears. Maybe even panic. But what I felt wasn't nerves. It was the terrible, suffocating certainty that if I said yes tonight, I would disappear. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic way. Piece by piece. Smile by smile. Signature by signature. Until there was nothing left of Claire Bennett except a new last name and a diamond ring that felt more like a handcuff than a promise. The wind shoved against me as I stumbled past a row of dark townhouses, my breathing ragged, my fingers stiff around the folds of my skirt. My phone had died 20 minutes ago. My veil was gone. My hair, pinned so carefully by hands that had called me lucky, was falling loose around my face in damp curls. I must have looked insane. A runaway bride in the middle of January, crossing empty streets after midnight like the city itself had turned its back on me. Somewhere behind me a car door slammed. I froze. For one heartbeat I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Every terrible possibility crashed into me at once. Victor's men. One of his cousins. Someone sent to bring me back before the guests even realized I was gone. I ducked between two parked cars, crouching low, my knees hitting slush and salt, my whole body shaking so hard my teeth started to chatter. Headlights swept slowly across the street. Not searching. Hunting. I pressed one hand over my mouth and prayed for the first time in years. Please. Please don't let them find me. The car rolled past. Black. Long, expensive. The kind of vehicle men like Victor used because it made ordinary people step aside without being asked. I waited until the lights disappeared, then forced myself up again, but my legs didn't feel like mine anymore. The world had gone blurry at the edges. My fingers were blue. My wedding dress, once soft and bright and impossibly expensive, felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I made it half a block before my body gave up. My knees buckled first, then my hands, then the rest of me. I hit the sidewalk hard enough to taste blood where I bit my lip, but even that felt far away. Snow kissed my eyelashes. My cheek pressed against frozen concrete. Somewhere in the distance I heard tires stop. Doors opened. Men's voices. One of them sharp with alarm. Another low. Controlled. Dangerous. Then footsteps came toward me, steady and unhurried, and a voice I had never heard before said, "She's freezing. Get her in the car." I woke up to warmth so sudden it hurt. Not real pain. Worse. The kind that comes when your body remembers how cold it had been and protests the return to life. My fingers burned first. Then my toes. Then my cheeks, as if someone had held fire too close to frozen skin. I tried to move and found three things immediately. I was under a blanket softer than anything I had ever owned. I was lying in a bed that did not belong to me. And someone was sitting in the chair beside the window, watching me like he had been there a long time. For one disoriented second, I thought Victor had found me. The panic hit so fast I nearly choked on it. I pushed myself upright, tangled in heavy covers, and the room spun hard enough to blur the walls into streaks of dark wood, amber light and shadow. A hand reached toward me, not touching, just close enough to stop me if I fell. "Easy," the man said. His voice was low and even, the same voice I had heard through the snow. "You were half frozen when we found you. Found you. Not caught you. Not brought you back. Found you." I stared at him, forcing my vision to settle. He was younger than I expected for a man who sounded that controlled. Early 30s maybe. Dark hair. Sharp cheekbones. A black sweater instead of a suit now, but there was nothing soft about him. He sat with the kind of stillness that made everything around him feel temporary, like the room itself would rearrange if he decided it should. Where am I? My voice came out thin, rough, barely mine. Safe for the moment. It was not an answer. Men who gave real answers usually had nothing to hide. Men who spoke like that always did. I looked past him then, taking in the rest of the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows hidden behind drawn curtains. A fire burning low in a stone fireplace. A lamp casting warm gold across furniture that looked expensive without trying too hard. No personal clutter. No photographs. No softness except the blanket around me. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a place prepared for emergencies no one discussed out loud. I need to leave. The words came out before I could stop them. His gaze did not shift. No, you do not. Something in my chest tightened. You cannot keep me here. I can keep you alive here. He said it without arrogance, which somehow made it worse. Like he was stating a fact no sane person would argue with. I swallowed, my throat dry. Who are you? For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not surprise. More like recognition that we had reached the part of the night where lies would be inefficient. He stood, and I hated how the simple movement changed the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, controlled in a way that made every step seem deliberate. He crossed to the small table by the fireplace, picked up a crystal glass of water, and held it out to me. I hesitated before taking it. My hand shook so badly that water rippled against the rim. His eyes dropped to my left hand then, to the ring still on my finger. White gold. Pear-cut diamond. Victor had chosen it because cameras would love it. The man looked back at me with a calm that suddenly felt dangerous. Your name is Claire Bennett, he said. It was not a question. My grip tightened on the glass. How do you know that? He ignored the question the way powerful men always do when they are deciding how much truth a frightened woman can survive at once. You disappeared less than 2 hours before your wedding. My heartbeat stumbled. Who are you? I asked again, louder this time. He studied me for one long second, then said, Adrian Hayes. The name hit me harder than the cold ever had. Even if people did not say it loudly, they said it. In whispers. In lowered voices at charity dinners. In careful warnings disguised as gossip. Adrian Hayes. The man who never chased attention because attention always found him anyway. The man Victor once called the only rival worth respecting, and the only one worth fearing. I looked from his face to the fire, to the door, back to him. My mouth went dry all over again. You are him. He did not smile. Yes. The room seemed to get colder despite the heat. I had run from one powerful man straight into the hands of another. My fingers curled around the blanket, and the ring on my hand suddenly felt heavier than ever. Adrian glanced at it once more, then back at my face. You were wearing my rival's ring in the middle of a snowstorm, he said quietly. So I think it is time you tell me why. For a second I could not speak. My mind kept trying to force Adrian Hayes into the category of rumor, not reality. Men like him were supposed to exist in newspaper whispers and private dining room conversations, not 3 feet from my bed holding a glass of water like it was the most natural thing in the world to rescue another man's bride from a sidewalk covered in snow. I looked at the door again. Heavy wood. Brass handle. Closed. I looked at the windows. Thick curtains. No way to tell how high up we were or how far from the city. Every exit felt theoretical. I am not his bride, I said finally, and even to me my voice sounded weak. Adrian tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they hear something interesting and decide not to interrupt it. Then explain the dress. My fingers tightened around the glass. I was supposed to marry him. The words tasted wrong. Too clean for something so ugly. But I left. People do not usually run barefoot into a New York winter because they got nervous about a cake and a seating chart. His tone stayed calm, but there was steel under it now. A test. Not cruel. Not kind either. Just precise. I hated that part of me wanted to answer him honestly. Maybe because he had already seen me at my worst. Frozen. Terrified. Curled on concrete in a dress that no longer looked bridal, only ruined. There was dignity in silence, but there was also exhaustion, and I did not have enough strength left to defend a lie. Victor was not marrying me because he loved me. Adrian said nothing. Somehow that made it easier. My father used to say powerful men only offer gifts when they expect ownership in return. I thought he was being cynical. I thought Victor was different. My laugh came out small and bitter. I was wrong. The fire snapped softly in the silence. I stared into it instead of at Adrian. 3 weeks ago, I found paperwork in his study. Contracts. Property transfers. A trust drafted in my name that I had never agreed to. There were notes attached. Not romantic notes. Numbers. Timelines. Names of board members. My name was listed beside a merger like I was part of the package. Even now, saying it out loud made my stomach turn. He was using the wedding to lock in an alliance. My family name, my shares, my face in the papers. I was not a fiancé. I was leverage in white satin. Adrian's expression did not soften, but something colder settled in his eyes. Not directed at me. Beyond me. Toward the man whose ring still sat on my finger. "And you are certain?" he asked. "I read every page twice. Did Victor know you saw them?" I shook my head, then stopped when the room shifted. Adrian noticed and reached for the bedside table, setting the water down before I spilled it. Again he did not touch me. "I do not think so," I whispered. I smiled for the photographers. I let them zip up the dress. I walked down the aisle. Then I looked at him standing there like he had already won, and I knew if I said the vows, I would spend the rest of my life asking permission to breathe. Adrian stood very still. "So you ran?" "Yes." The word came out sharper this time. Stronger. Because that part at least was mine. He glanced at my hand again. "Why keep the ring?" I looked down at it like I was seeing it for the first time. The diamond caught the firelight and flashed cold. Expensive. Immaculate. Empty. I forgot it was there. Adrian's gaze lifted back to my face. There was no mockery in it. No disbelief. Only assessment. That is the kind of mistake that gets people found. I swallowed. "Then let me leave before he finds me here." The answer came immediately. "No," my head snapped up. "You do not understand. If Victor thinks I am with you, then this becomes something else." "It already is something else," Adrian said quietly. "The second I picked you up, it stopped being only your problem." Something in my chest tightened at that. Fear mostly. But not only fear. There was a terrible comfort in being spoken to by someone who sounded as if chaos had already been measured and accounted for. He moved toward the fire, one hand resting briefly on the mantel as if grounding himself in thought. "Until I know who saw you leave, who has been told, and how quickly Victor will move, you are not walking out that door." I should have argued. I did argue in my head. But my body betrayed me then. A hard shiver ran through me so suddenly my teeth clicked together. Adrian turned back at once, and this time his voice lost some of its edge. "You need rest more than rebellion tonight, Claire." The way he said my name was not gentle, just certain, controlled, dangerous in a different way than Victor had ever been. Victor always sounded like he was taking. Adrian sounded like he had already decided what he was protecting, and somehow that frightened me more. I should have slept after that. My body wanted to. Every muscle ached with the dull heaviness that comes after too much cold, too much fear, too little air. But sleep felt reckless in a house that belonged to Adrian Hayes. So I stayed awake, propped against pillows that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the quieter sound of him moving somewhere beyond the room. Not pacing. Adrian did not seem like a man who paced. More like a man who stood still until the rest of the world arranged itself around his decisions. At some point, a woman in navy scrubs came in carrying a tray with tea, aspirin, and a thermometer. She looked to be in her 40s, composed in the way nurses are when they have seen everything and chosen not to dramatize any of it. "I am Mara," she said, checking my temperature with efficient hands. "You scared half the household." Half the household. I almost asked how many people it took to run a place like this, but the answer would have frightened me more than the question. Mara helped me sip hot tea that tasted faintly of lemon and honey, then laid out dry clothes on the end of the bed. Soft gray sweats. A cream sweater. Thick socks. Nothing too intimate. Nothing chosen to remind me I was dependent. That felt deliberate. "Mr. Hayes asked me to tell you that the bathroom is through there," she said, nodding toward a door paneled in white oak. And that no one will enter unless you ask. My fingers paused on the blanket. He said that. Mara gave me a look I could not quite read. Mr. Hayes says many things. The interesting part is which ones he expects obeyed. After she left, I changed slowly, peeling off the dress that had once cost more than my first car. Wet satin slid to the floor in a heavy ruined heap, lace darkened by slush, hem streaked gray from city streets. I stared at it for a long moment. At the bodice. At the delicate buttons running down the back. At the life I had almost sealed myself into. Then I saw the ring again, bright against my hand, and anger steadied me in a way warmth had not. I twisted it off. Not gracefully. It caught at the knuckle, as if even that wanted to resist leaving. When it finally came free, I held it in my palm and felt nothing noble. No relief. No triumph. Just the sick clarity that an object could be worth a small fortune and still mean absolutely nothing. When I stepped out of the bedroom an hour later, the hallway was silent enough to feel curated. Dark hardwood floors. Low golden sconces. Art chosen for taste, not comfort. Somewhere downstairs, I heard the distant hum of male voices cut short the second my footsteps reached the landing. I stopped with one hand on the banister. Below me stretched a living room large enough to echo, all stone, leather, and expensive restraint. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a pale wash of early morning beyond the glass. Snow covered the grounds in smooth white sheets broken only by tire tracks leading toward a set of iron gates. Adrian stood near the fireplace in a charcoal suit, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone. Two men in dark jackets stood across from him, both broad-shouldered, both alert in the careful way that said danger was a profession, not a mood. Adrian looked up before I reached the last step. Of course he did. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed the exact second the temperature in a room changed. His gaze moved over me once, taking in the sweater, the dry hair, the ring no longer on my finger. It paused there for half a beat before returning to my face. "You should be in bed," he said. "You should stop deciding that for me." One of the men looked down immediately, as if hiding the fact that he had heard me speak to Adrian Hayes like that, and was not sure whether to admire it or start planning my funeral. But Adrian only ended his call and set the phone on the mantel. "And yet here you are," he said. I walked the rest of the way into the room, ignoring the way my legs still felt unsteady. "I want to know where I am." "Westchester." "How far from the city?" "Far enough that no one accidentally finds you." That word again. Accidentally. As if deliberate searching was the real threat now. I opened my hand and held out the ring. It looked smaller in daylight. Less magical. More transactional. "Then start by getting rid of this." For the first time since I had met him, Adrian actually looked surprised. Not dramatically. Just enough to make him seem briefly, dangerously human. He stepped closer and took the ring from my palm without letting his fingers brush mine. His hand closed around it. "Are you sure?" he asked. I thought about Victor at the altar. About the contracts in his study. About the way I had run through the snow feeling less like a bride than a hostage who had slipped a lock. I have never been more sure of anything. Adrian held my gaze for one long second, then slipped the ring into his pocket like he was putting away evidence. "Good," he said quietly, "because Victor Kane has already started looking for you." The words landed harder than I expected. Victor Kane has already started looking for you. Not might. Not soon. Already. The room seemed to sharpen around me after that. Every edge cleaner. Every silence more deliberate. Snow glowed beyond the windows in the pale gray light of morning, beautiful in the way dangerous things often are from a distance. I folded my arms across my chest, more to steady myself than to look brave. "How?" I asked. Adrian did not answer right away. He crossed to the sideboard, poured coffee into a black porcelain cup, and handed it to me as if this were an ordinary conversation between ordinary people in an ordinary house. The heat seeped through the ceramic into my palms. I hated how much I needed it. "Because men like Victor do not respond well to embarrassment," Adrian said at last. "A missing bride is not romantic scandal to him. It is a public insult. It tells his allies he could not control the room, the church, or the woman standing at the altar." His voice never rose. That made it worse. It gave every word the weight of something measured and therefore probably true. So he will correct the narrative quickly. Narrative, I repeated. That is what this is to you? Adrian's eyes met mine over the rim of his own cup. Dark, steady, impossible to rush. It is what it is to men who survive by controlling perception. I looked away first. Because he was right and because I hated that he was right. Down the hall, somewhere out of sight, a clock chimed 8 times. One of the men near the doorway shifted his weight, then went still again when Adrian glanced in his direction. Everyone in this house seemed to move according to forces I could not see. What is he saying? I asked quietly. Adrian set his cup down. So far? That you were overwhelmed. That you panicked. That you are fragile, exhausted, and need privacy. A humorless laugh escaped me before I could stop it. How generous of him. It gets worse. Of course it did. Men like Victor never stopped at the lie that made them look kind if a crueler one served them better. Adrian slid a phone across the mantel toward me. The screen showed a society blog photo from the church steps. Me in white. Victor in black. Both of us beautiful from far away in the polished, expensive way that magazines call effortless when everyone involved knows it took a team and a budget. Beneath the picture was a statement from a family spokesperson. I read only the first 2 lines before my stomach turned. Claire Bennett is resting after an emotional episode brought on by stress and fatigue. The wedding has been postponed while she receives care surrounded by loved ones. I stared at the words until they blurred. Emotional episode. Receives care. Surrounded by loved ones. Every sentence turned my choice into a symptom, my escape into weakness, my refusal into instability. He is trying to make me sound unreliable, I said. He is trying to make sure that when you speak, no one trusts the version that embarrasses him. Adrian said it flatly like a weather report, but something moved in his jaw. Tension. Controlled but there. I put the phone down carefully because suddenly I wanted to throw it hard enough to hear it break. And if I go public first? You can. He paused. But then you would need evidence, a legal strategy, and enough protection to survive the attention. The word survive should have sounded dramatic. In his mouth it sounded logistical. That was somehow more frightening. I took a sip of coffee and nearly winced. Still too hot. Bitter. Real. So what are you saying? Adrian stepped closer, not enough to crowd me. Just enough that the men near the door became background. I am saying Victor will try charm first. Concern second. Pressure third. And after that? His gaze held mine a beat too long. After that, he will stop asking. A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with snow or morning air. I looked down into my cup, watching the dark surface tremble against the porcelain because my hands were not as steady as I wanted them to be. I do not want a war started over me. You did not start this, Adrian said. The firmness in his voice made me look up. You refused to be used. Men like Victor call that betrayal because it is easier than calling it what it is. Which is what? For the first time all morning, something almost human softened his expression. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition. Courage, he said. And I hated how much that single word felt like warmth anyway. The rest of that morning passed in a strange, suspended quiet, as if the house itself understood that the world outside had shifted and was waiting to see whether it should brace for impact. Adrian left the room after that, taking the 2 men with him, and I was alone with my coffee, my thoughts, and the terrible realization that he had just called what I did courage with the same tone another man might use to describe weather, facts, or damage already done. I did not know what unsettled me more, the word itself or the fact that I believed he meant it. Mara found me an hour later in a sunroom at the back of the house, sitting beneath a wall of glass and staring out at a frozen garden where stone paths disappeared beneath fresh snow. She carried a tray with toast, eggs, fruit, and tea strong enough to smell medicinal. Eat, she said, setting it down in front of me with the calm authority of someone who had long ago learned that care and command often travel together. Mr. Hayes says you have been running on fear and bad decisions for at least 24 hours. I almost smiled despite myself. Does Mr. Hayes always issue medical opinions now? Only when he thinks no one else is moving fast enough. She poured tea into a white cup and slid it toward me. He also says you are not to leave the property. There it was. The golden cage. The part one had been waiting for. I looked out the window again to the long black iron fence visible through the trees, the camera mounted near the side gate, the tire tracks. That had already half disappeared under new snowfall. That sounds less like concern and more like a rule. It is both, Mara said simply. In this house, those things often overlap. After she left, I forced myself to eat even though my stomach felt like it had been tied in knots with cold wire. By noon I had learned 3 things. First, Adrian's house was less a home than a fortress disguised as taste. Second, every hallway somehow led past at least one man who looked politely dangerous. Third, no one treated me like a prisoner, which only made the restrictions harder to fight because they came wrapped in courtesy instead of cruelty. A young woman named Elena brought me a phone charger but no phone. Another man I had not met before opened doors for me without being asked and never once let me walk out of his line of sight. It was all smooth, quiet, efficient, control polished until it looked like care. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped behind the trees and the whole estate had turned silver blue under the winter sky. I found Adrian in the library because somehow I already knew a man like him would have one. He stood by the fireplace in shirt sleeves, reading something on a tablet while the room glowed amber around him. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked actually read, not chosen by a designer. A storm lamp burned on the desk. Outside the tall windows, snow drifted down in slow, deliberate spirals. "Do all your prisons have first editions and cashmere blankets?" I asked. "Or am I getting special treatment?" Adrian looked up without surprise, as if he had known I was coming before I had reached the door. "If this were a prison, Claire, you would know it." "Would I?" "Yes." He set the tablet down on the desk and faced me fully. "Because I would not pretend otherwise." There was something infuriating about a man who answered that directly. "You said I am not leaving the property." "Correct." "For how long?" "Until it is safe." "And who decides that?" "I do." The answer came so quickly, so calmly that it almost took my breath away. "You really do hear yourself, do not you?" I asked. "You hear how that sounds?" "I hear exactly how it sounds." His eyes did not leave mine. "I also know what happens when frightened people mistake movement for freedom." Anger flashed hot and immediate through me. I did not run from one controlling man to hand myself over to another. The words landed hard in the quiet room. Adrian's jaw tightened just once. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me. He stepped closer, measured and still infuriatingly calm. "Then do not confuse protection with possession. That is easy for you to say when you are the one holding the keys." His gaze sharpened. "And easy for you to say when you have not yet seen how quickly Victor is willing to rewrite your life in public." He reached for the tablet, tapped the screen once and turned it toward me. A local news segment filled the display. There I was again, smiling from church photos, while a polished anchor spoke in sympathetic tones about a postponed society wedding and an unnamed bride suffering from emotional instability. Beneath the headline, a second line had appeared since morning. "Sources close to the couple say the bride may be under outside influence." I stared at the words until the meaning clicked into place. Then my blood ran cold all over again. Outside influence. Not missing. Not resting. Not gone by choice. Someone had planted the idea that I was being manipulated. That I had been led astray. That if Victor found me in another man's house, he could claim he was rescuing me. I looked up at Adrian sharply. He was already watching my face, reading the conclusion as it formed. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "He is not looking for a bride anymore. He is building a story that gives him the right to take you back." The sentence stayed with me long after I left the library. He is building a story that gives him the right to take you back. I carried it with me down the hallway into the bedroom, into the bathroom where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at a woman I barely recognized. My hair was loose and still slightly damp at the ends. The gray sweater hung softly over my frame, ordinary in a way that should have comforted me. But my eyes looked different. Too alert. Too tired. Like some part of me had understood at last that this was never just about running from a wedding. It was about surviving the kind of men who believed every room, every conversation, every woman inside their reach could be managed if they applied enough pressure and enough charm. By evening the snow had stopped. The house settled into that expensive silence again, lit by lamps and fireplaces and the dim gold of winter dusk. I wondered because standing still made my thoughts louder. A music room. A formal dining room no one used. A gallery hall lined with black and white photographs of cities at night. No family portraits. No smiling vacations. No visible softness. Yet everywhere I looked there were traces of control so exact they almost became personality. Fresh flowers replaced before they wilted. Firewood stacked with geometric precision. A chessboard in the sitting room mid-game. As if someone had left it there to remind visitors that everything in this house was strategy. I found Adrian in the kitchen, which somehow surprised me more than the armed men or the security cameras. The room was warm with low-hanging lights and the smell of rosemary, garlic, and something simmering in a heavy pot on the stove. He stood at the counter with his sleeves rolled up, a knife in one hand, calmly slicing bread like a man who had never once rushed for anyone in his life. I stopped in the doorway and just looked at him. Maybe because it was easier to understand danger in a dark suit with bodyguards. Harder to understand it with a dish towel over one shoulder, and a glass of red wine untouched near his elbow. He glanced up. "You look disappointed." "I am trying to decide whether this is a trick." "Dinner." He lifted one dark brow. "That would be a very elaborate one." I should have turned around. I should have kept my distance. Instead I stepped farther into the room, drawn by warmth and the unfamiliar comfort of something ordinary happening inside a life that was clearly anything but ordinary. "You cook," I said. "Occasionally." "That sounds suspiciously like yes." A faint almost smile touched his mouth and disappeared before I was sure I saw it. "Mara says my standards are unreasonable and my patience with delivery food is worse." He turned back to the cutting board. "Sit down." It should have sounded like an order. Somehow in that kitchen, with the stove humming and the snow dark beyond the windows, it sounded almost domestic. That frightened me in a new and quieter way. I sat anyway at the Long Island counter, wrapping both hands around the mug of tea. He sat in front of me without asking how I took it. He remembered lemon. Somehow he remembered honey. "Do you do this for everyone hiding in your house?" I asked. Adrian placed the bread on a tray and finally looked at me fully. "You are the first runaway bride I have ever rescued from the side of the road, so my sample size is limited." The answer caught me off guard. Not because it was funny exactly, but because it was dry enough to be close to humor. I let out a small laugh before I could stop it. The sound surprised both of us. His expression changed by a fraction. Less guarded. More attentive. Like he had discovered something rare, and was deciding whether speaking would make it vanish. The silence after that should have been awkward. It was not. Just strange. Warm. Careful. I watched him move around the kitchen with the same precision he used in every other room. Only here it felt less like control and more like ritual. He tasted the sauce once, added salt, lowered the flame. He worked without waste, without flourish, and I realized that was true of everything about him. Adrian did not perform power. He inhabited it. "Why were you watching the wedding?" I asked softly. The knife stopped in his hand. Not dramatically. Just enough. He set it down. "Victor Kane does not spend that much money on flowers and press unless he expects a return. So you were curious." No, his gaze met mine across the warm kitchen light. I was suspicious. I held his eyes. Of me. Of him. Something in my chest eased and tightened at the same time. "And when you saw me in the snow?" For the first time since I met him, Adrian did not answer immediately. The kitchen seemed quieter all at once. The house farther away. Even the simmering pot sounded distant. "I saw someone who had chosen the cold. Over what was waiting behind her," he said at last. His voice had gone lower, stripped clean of irony. That told me everything I needed to know. I looked down at my tea because suddenly meeting his eyes felt harder than running through a storm had. The steam curled upward between us. Outside, the dark glass reflected the room back at us like another life. "You barely know me," I whispered. "I know enough." "That sounds dangerous." "It usually is." When I looked up again, Adrian was already watching me with that same steady, unreadable focus. But something had changed. Not in him exactly. In the air between us. As if the room had quietly crossed some invisible line while neither of us was looking. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. Once. Twice. He checked the screen, and the warmth left his face so fast it was like watching a light go out. What happened? I asked. Adrian picked up the phone and held it out to me. On the screen was a photograph taken less than an hour earlier outside my mother's townhouse in Manhattan. Victor stood on the front steps beside my mother, one hand at her back, both of them facing the cameras with carefully arranged concern. My blood went cold. The headline beneath the image read, "Family of missing bride appeals for her safe return." For a moment I could not breathe. The kitchen, the fire, the rosemary in the air, the quiet hum of the house behind us, all of it disappeared beneath the sight of my mother standing beside Victor as if she had chosen him over me without even pretending to hesitate. She wore a camel coat and pearl earrings, her blonde hair perfectly set, her expression arranged into the kind of polished concern wealthy women use when cameras are close and truth is inconvenient. Victor stood beside her in a dark overcoat, one hand resting lightly at the center of her back like he belonged there. Like he belonged everywhere. Like the entire city was a room he had already learned how to walk through without ever hearing no. No, I whispered, but the word came out thin and useless. Adrian took the phone back before I could drop it. He read something on the screen, his jaw hardening with each line. He gave a statement 10 minutes ago, he said. He claims your family is devastated and fears you may have been manipulated by someone taking advantage of your emotional state. I stared at him. Someone. Adrian's eyes lifted to mine. He is not naming me yet. Yet. My voice cracked on the word. Because if he names you, then this becomes a direct challenge. Adrian set the phone face down on the counter, and the soft tap sounded far too final. I turned away from him then because suddenly standing still felt impossible. I crossed the kitchen, then crossed it again, my socks whispering against stone floors while panic rose inside me in hot, dizzy waves. My mother knows exactly what he is doing, I said. She knows how he lies. She knows what kind of man he is. Adrian said nothing. I laughed once, sharp and bitter. Actually, that is not true. She probably does not think he is lying at all. She thinks this is damage control. She thinks I embarrassed everyone and now the adults are cleaning it up. I pressed both hands to the edge of the counter until the marble bit cold into my palms. She always loved appearances more than honesty. As long as the table was set correctly and the guests smiled at the right moments, she could survive anything. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Not because I trusted Adrian exactly, but because I was too tired to hold them in. When my father died, she cried beautifully. Do you know what I mean by that? Beautifully. Perfect black dress. Perfect soft voice. Perfect thank you notes. Then 6 weeks later she started reorganizing the guest list for the foundation gala, because grief had already become socially inconvenient. I shut my eyes for a second, ashamed of how much that confession revealed, ashamed of how little I cared anymore. And now she is standing beside Victor because he is polished and useful and says the right things in public, and I am the daughter who ran. The kitchen stayed very quiet. When I finally looked up, Adrian had not moved. He was watching me the way he always did, steady and unreadable, but there was nothing cold in it now. Only attention. Dangerous, focused attention. Then do not let them be the only ones. Speaking, he said. I let out a breath that shook. You think I should call her? No, his answer came immediately. Why not? Because if your mother is standing beside Victor for cameras, then anything you say to her tonight becomes his by morning. I hated that he was probably right. I hated more that this was the world we were in now, one where even a daughter's voice might become leverage if it landed in the wrong ear. So what do? I asked. Adrian came around the island then, stopping an arm's length away. Not close enough to crowd me. Close enough that I could feel the force of his presence all the same. First, you stop reacting to the story he is writing and start thinking about the one he is afraid of. Which is the truth. I almost laughed again, but there was nothing funny left in me. The truth is not glamorous enough for people like Victor. It does not need to be glamorous, Adrian said. It needs to be provable. The word settled between us. Provable. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Solid. Real. I thought of the contracts in Victor's study. The trust papers. The notes in the margins. My pulse stumbled. Adrian saw it happen. Of course he did. What? he said quietly. I hesitated only a second. I did not just read the paperwork. His gaze sharpened. Claire. I took pictures. The room seemed to go still around us. I could hear the clock in the hallway again, the faint hiss from the stove, my own heartbeat in my ears. The morning I found the documents, I used my phone and photographed every page I could before someone came upstairs. I forgot about them because everything became the wedding after that. The fittings, the press, the rehearsals. I was trying to act normal long enough to get out. Adrian stared at me for one long second, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something dangerously close to approval in his eyes. Where is your phone now? My stomach dropped. At the church, I said. Or in one of the cars. I do not know. I left it in the bridal suite when I ran. Adrian's expression changed instantly, focus narrowing with surgical precision. He reached for his phone again, already moving, already deciding. If those pictures still exist, he said, voice low and absolute, then Victor is not the only one building a story tonight. The house changed the second Adrian started giving orders. It was subtle if you did not know what to listen for. A door closing faster than before. Footsteps moving with purpose instead of patience. The low murmur of men speaking into earpieces somewhere down the hall. Even the air seemed to tighten, as if the walls themselves understood that whatever fragile stillness had existed here all day was over now. Adrian stood at the far end of the kitchen with his phone to his ear, voice low and clipped, each sentence spare enough to sound almost calm if you ignored the speed beneath it. I want the bridal suite cleared before anyone thinks to sanitize it. Quietly. No police. No hotel staff unless I approve them. And find the phone before Victor remembers she is smarter than he gave her credit for. Smarter than he gave her credit for. The words should have felt flattering. Instead they made my pulse beat harder. Because if Adrian understood the value of those photographs this quickly, then Victor would too the second he started asking the right questions. I stayed where I was at the kitchen island, fingers curled around my cooling tea, listening to pieces of a plan assemble around me without my consent. Vehicles. Entry points. Staff rotations at the church. A florist entrance with poor visibility. One of Adrian's men already on the Upper East Side. Every sentence reminded me that the world he moved through was built on contingencies ordinary people never had to imagine. When he finally ended the call, the screen of his phone went black in his hand. For a moment he did not move. Then he looked up at me, and the room felt smaller than it had a minute earlier. Tell me exactly where you left it, he said. I set the mug down before I dropped it. In the bridal suite at St. Matthew's. On the vanity by the mirror, I think. I had it while the stylists were there. I remember putting it down when my mother walked in. After that everything blurred. Adrian crossed back to the island and braced one hand against the stone countertop. Not aggressively. Just close. Enough that I could see the focus in his face sharpen. You think, he repeated. Claire, I need better than that. Heat rose in my chest, sudden and defensive. I had been awake since 5 in the morning. I was zipped into 12 pounds of fabric and being told where to stand every 3 minutes while people turned my life into a magazine spread. I am sorry if my memory of the vanity arrangement is not perfect. The words came out sharper than I intended. The kitchen went still. Adrian held my gaze for one long second, then nodded once. Fair. It was not an apology exactly, but it was close enough to throw me off balance. He straightened. Did you lock the phone? Yes. Face recognition? No. 6-digit code. Good. His eyes dropped briefly to my bare left hand, as if confirming again that the ring was gone, that something had changed in me since morning besides clothes and body temperature. Bad news? I asked. Adrian slipped the phone into his pocket. If Victor has the device, he can try to crack it, but that takes time if he does not know your habits. And the good news? If he does not yet know what is on it, he may still assume it is only personal. I exhaled slowly. You make that sound like a blessing. Tonight it might be. He reached for a legal pad lying near the bowl of fruit on the counter and slid it toward me with a pen. Write down the passcode anyway. Also every email account, cloud backup, shared photo stream, anything that might mirror those images automatically. I looked at the pad, then back at him. You trust me enough to hand me a pen in your fortress? I trust that you are motivated. That is not the same thing. No, Adrian said. It is often more reliable. I should not have smiled at that, but something in me did. Barely. Gone almost before it formed. Still he noticed. Of course he noticed. I wrote down the code, then my email, then the names of 2 cloud accounts I had not thought about since college. Adrian read the page once, folded it, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket that one of the staff had apparently brought in without my seeing. What now? I asked. Now we wait. For my people to confirm whether the phone is still at the church. And if it is not? Adrian's expression did not change. Then we find out who moved it. Outside the windows, the sky had gone fully dark, black glass reflecting the kitchen back at us in double. For the first time all day, the estate no longer felt hidden. It felt exposed. Every light a signal. Every shadow a possible route inward. I rubbed my hands against my sleeves and hated the tremor still living in them. Adrian noticed that too. He always noticed. Sit, he said quietly. You have been upright too long. I am not fragile. I know. His tone softened by a fraction. That does not make you recovered. I sat because arguing suddenly felt heavier than the motion itself. Adrian moved to the stove and lowered the flame beneath the pot he had abandoned earlier, as if saving dinner still mattered in the middle of everything else. The ordinariness of the gesture almost undid me. I looked down at my hands, at the faint red marks winter had left behind, at the chipped pale polish I had not had time to fix before the wedding. If those pictures are gone, I said, then it is just my word against his. Adrian turned back toward me, one hand resting on the counter, his face unreadable in the kitchen light. No, he said. If those pictures are gone, then it means someone knew to remove them. And that tells me something far more useful. A chill ran through me. Which is what? His eyes held mine, dark and absolute. That Victor is not the only person who knew where you were supposed to be tonight. Night settled over the estate like a held breath. The windows had turned black hours ago, reflecting the kitchen lights back at us until it felt like the house floated in darkness with nothing beyond it but snow and trees and secrets. I had just started to believe the waiting might stretch until morning when Adrian's phone buzzed once against the counter. He looked at the screen and the room changed. No raised voice. No dramatic curse. Just that same terrifying stillness I had come to recognize as his version of alarm. What is it? I asked. He answered the call without looking away from me. Talk. Whoever was on the other end spoke fast enough that I could only catch fragments. Church. Cleared. Bridal suite empty. Then Adrian's expression hardened by a fraction. Say that again. My stomach tightened. He listened another 10 seconds, then ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket with too much care. That was how I knew the news was bad. The phone is gone, he said. I stared at him. Gone how? Not left behind. Removed. He reached for the legal pad where I had written my account names and tapped the paper once with 2 fingers. The vanity was clean. The room had been reset for staff. Your makeup bag was still there. Your shoes were still there. The phone was the only personal item missing. A cold wave moved through me, so suddenly my hands went numb all over again. Victor. Adrian's gaze stayed on mine. Probably. As if that word left room for hope when it really only left room for worse possibilities. I pushed back from the island too quickly, my chair scraping hard across stone. Then he knows. Not necessarily. Adrian moved around the counter before I had taken 2 steps, intercepting me with quiet precision. He did not touch me. He just stood there, broad-shouldered and immovable, a human barrier between me and panic. Claire, look at me. I hated that I did. Hated more that it helped. If Victor knew for certain what was on the phone, he would not still be using sympathy and press conferences. He would already be trying to discredit specific evidence. The fact that he is not means he is either still locked out or still guessing. That is supposed to make me feel better? My voice came out too high, too thin. No, Adrian said. It is supposed to make you think clearly. I turned away from him because suddenly the kitchen felt too warm, the walls too close. Who else knew where I was supposed to be? I said, echoing his words from earlier. My mother. The wedding planner. Victor's staff. Mine. Drivers. Makeup artists. Florists. Half of Manhattan, apparently. No, Adrian's voice followed me, calm and exact. Who knew you had access to something he would want back? I stopped. The distinction hit like a crack of ice. Underfoot. Not the wedding. The documents. The risk. I tried to think past the noise in my own head. No one saw me take the pictures. Who saw you in his study? I closed my eyes. The memory came back in fragments. Mahogany shelves. Open folders. My pulse in my ears. The faint scent of Victor's cologne still in the room. His house manager passed me in the hallway when I came out, I said slowly. Mrs. Calloway. She asked if I needed anything. I told her I was looking for the powder room. Adrian's expression did not change, but the silence around him sharpened. Did she believe you? I do not know. Did she look frightened or curious? Neither. I swallowed. She looked careful. Adrian nodded once, like a man confirming a detail in a blueprint. Then Victor may not be working alone. You think someone is feeding him information? I think powerful men rarely have to search blind when enough people depend on staying useful. The word should not have surprised me. Still, they hollowed something out in my chest. Because that was the true shape of it, was not it? Not one villain. Not one terrible choice. A whole polished machine of people who smiled, served champagne, adjusted veils, opened doors, and quietly reported whatever would keep them paid and protected. I need air, I said, though what I really needed was a different life. Adrian looked toward the windows. No, I am not asking to leave the property. I just need 5 minutes outside. You are not stepping into the open tonight. Adrian. It was the first time I had said his name like that. Not in fear. Not in disbelief. In frustration. It made us both go still. He looked at me for one long second, then crossed to the security panel mounted near the archway and pressed a button. Somewhere deeper in the house, a lock released with a muted click. Sunroom only, he said. Lights stay low. Door stays closed after you. I should have argued about the guardrail still wrapped around even that mercy. Instead I went. The sunroom at night felt like standing inside a lantern. Beyond the glass, the world was silver and black, the grounds washed pale by moonlight reflecting off snow. Bare trees stood, motionless at the edge of the property, their branches like ink against the sky. I pressed my fingertips to the cool pane and tried to breathe more slowly. For 1 minute, then 2, the only sound was the faint hum of heat through the floor vents and the blood rushing in my ears. Then headlights flashed between the trees. I went still. Not on the main drive. Farther out. Near the east fence line where the woods met the road. 2 pale beams. Gone. Then there again, briefly, as if a vehicle had turned and stopped behind the tree cover. The breath caught in my throat before I could stop it. Adrian was beside me almost instantly, close enough now that I could feel the heat of him at my shoulder as he followed my line of sight into the dark. Did you see that? I whispered. His face changed in the reflection. All warmth gone. All kitchen softness erased. He reached for his phone with one hand and the light switch with the other, plunging the room into shadow. Get down, he said quietly. And this time, Claire, do not argue with me. I dropped before I fully understood I was moving. 1 second I was staring into the dark beyond the glass, trying to convince myself I had imagined the headlights, and the next I was crouched on the floor behind a low velvet settee with my heart slamming so hard it hurt. The sunroom had gone almost black after Adrian killed the lights, the windows turning from mirrors into blank, cold sheets that showed nothing and everything at once. I could hear him beside me, not breathing hard, not rushing, just speaking in that low controlled voice into his phone as if the night had simply presented a problem and he intended to solve it. East fence line, he said. No floodlights yet. I want eyes first. Quiet approach. No one leaves the perimeter without my say. He listened, then added, and lock the south drive. Now. The call ended. For a second, neither of us moved. I could hear the heat ticking softly somewhere in the walls, the muted rush of blood in my ears, the distant sound of footsteps waking up elsewhere in the house. Not running. Coordinated. Like the estate had shifted into a second, hidden mode. Adrian turned his head toward me. In the dark, I could not make out his expression clearly, only the outline of his shoulders and the sharp plane of his cheek when moonlight caught it. Are you hurt? He asked. The question was so unexpected that it took me a second to answer. No good. He reached out then, not for me, but for the edge of the settee, angling it slightly to block more of the glass. The gesture was practical, efficient. Still, it sent a strange wave through my chest because it was exactly the kind of small protection a person does without thinking when their instincts have already decided someone matters. Tell me exactly what you saw, he said. I swallowed and forced myself to replay the image instead of the fear. 2 headlights. Not on the main drive. Farther east by the trees. They flashed once, disappeared, then came back. Like the car turned and stopped. Adrian nodded once. Anyone would think the fence line is the blind side. Is it? Not anymore. Somewhere outside, a beam of white light swept briefly across the snow, then vanished again. Not a floodlight. A flashlight kept low, searching without announcing itself. I hugged my arms tighter around myself. Do you think it is Victor? Adrian was quiet for a beat. I think it is someone testing how close they can get. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. The dark made everything feel closer. His voice. My breathing. The memory of him in the kitchen less than an hour ago. Sleeves rolled, stirring sauce while snow fell beyond the windows as if we were 2 ordinary people in an ordinary house. That version of the night felt impossible now. This is my fault, I whispered. Adrian's head turned sharply toward me. No, if I had not come here. No, he said again, firmer this time. You do not get to carry the moral burden for someone else choosing to hunt. The words landed hard in the quiet. I looked down at my hands, barely visible in the dark, and hated the way they trembled. You do not even know if they are here for me. I know enough. There it was again. That phrase. The one he used like a locked door. I almost laughed, except there was no room for humor in me. You say that like certainty. It is not certainty. His voice lowered. It is pattern recognition. Outside, another flashlight beam moved through the trees. This one closer. Then a voice sounded faintly over the estate grounds, too far away to make out words, only tone. Adrian's phone buzzed in his hand. He answered immediately, speaking so softly I caught almost nothing except, how many? And then, after a pause that felt too long, understood. He ended the call and stayed still for half a second, as if arranging the truth before he gave it to me. There is a car parked on the service road beyond the east line, he said. Engine warm. Lights off now. Plates covered. A chill moved through me so deep it felt identical to the snowbank where he found me. Covered. Yes. He did not soften the word. So whoever it is came prepared not to be identified. And you still think they are only testing? I think, Adrian said carefully, that if they intended to leave unnoticed, they would not have let you see them. I looked up at him then. Even in the dark, I could feel the shape of his attention lock fully onto me. Then why let me? His answer came without hesitation. Because fear makes people move. I understood at once. Move toward the phone. Move toward the gates. Move into the open. Move stupidly. My stomach dropped. You think they wanted me to panic? I think someone out there hoped you would do exactly what you asked me for earlier. Air. Outside. Escape. Freedom. The words rearranged themselves in my head until they no longer sounded innocent. I pressed one hand against my mouth for a second, furious at my own naivete. Adrian shifted closer, just enough that his shoulder nearly brushed mine. Claire. My name in his voice did something dangerous to me then. Not because it was tender, because it was steady. Listen carefully. No one gets to draw you out of this house tonight. Not Victor. Not his men. Not your fear. I turned to answer him, and in that exact moment headlights exploded across the far windows of the main house, bright and sudden and much closer than before. The entire estate lit up white for one terrible second. Then came the sound of tires on gravel from the front. Drive, and Adrian was already on his feet. Every line of him transformed from stillness into decision. Stay here, he said. Someone just came through my front gate. I should have stayed where he told me to. A smarter woman would have. A calmer one. But fear does not make you calm, and the last 24 hours had stripped something polite and obedient out of me that I do not think I ever got back. The moment Adrian disappeared through the archway, All dark focus and controlled speed. I counted to 3 and followed. Not closely. Not enough to be obvious. Just far enough to keep the line of his shoulders in sight as he moved through the main hall with 2 men appearing at his side as if summoned by instinct instead of sound. The house no longer felt like a house at all. Felt like a machine waking up. Lights came on in stages, low and deliberate. Doors opened and closed with quiet precision. Somewhere above us, I heard the soft lock of interior shutters sliding into place. By the time I reached the edge of the front hall, Adrian was already at the tall entry doors, one hand lifted slightly as if holding the entire room still. Through the glass panels I could see headlights washing pale over the circular drive, reflecting off snow, turning the night outside into a silver blur. A black sedan idled near the steps. Not one of Adrian's vehicles. Not one of mine. Elegant. Expensive. Familiar in the way bad news is familiar before it is spoken. One of the guards murmured something into an earpiece. Adrian answered without looking away from the drive. No one opens until I say. His voice was soft enough that I should not have heard it from where I stood half hidden beside a marble column. But I did. Maybe because the whole world felt sharpened now. Then the rear passenger door of the sedan opened, and my breath caught so hard it almost hurt. My mother stepped out first. Camel coat. Gloves. Hair perfectly arranged despite the hour, the drive, the weather, the obvious insanity of arriving at Adrian Hayes's estate in the middle of the night as if she were attending a charity dinner instead of walking into the center of a private war. For one stunned second, relief flickered through me. She came. She came for me. Then Victor emerged from the other side of the car, buttoning his overcoat with those same calm hands I had watched straighten his cuff links at the altar, and the relief died so fast it left a hollow ache in its place. Of course she had not come alone. Of course he had turned even this into theater. Adrian must have felt me step farther into the hall, because he turned his head just enough to find me in the reflection of the glass. The look he gave me was not anger. Worse. It was the look of a man who had predicted exactly this and still wished I had listened. I should have retreated. Instead I walked forward until I stood a few feet behind him, close enough to hear the soft exhale he gave through his nose. A private sign of frustration so small no one else would have noticed it. Go back upstairs, he said quietly. No, Claire. If my mother is at your door, I am not hiding in another room while men decide what version of me gets discussed. The words came out steadier than I felt. Adrian studied me for half a second, then glanced once toward the driveway where Victor had placed one gloved hand at my mother's elbow like a man guiding someone delicate through winter weather. The sight of it made something harden in me. Open the door, I said. Adrian's jaw tightened. You do not know what he wants. I looked straight through the glass at Victor Kane standing under my future husband's headlights like he belonged there. Yes, I said softly. I do. The silence in the foyer deepened. Then Adrian gave a single nod to the guard nearest the lock. The doors opened inward on a rush of cold air sharp enough to sting my throat. Snow scent. Exhaust. Night. My mother's eyes found me instantly, widening in what would have looked like relief to anyone who did not know her well. Victor's expression changed more subtly. Surprise first, quickly buried. Then satisfaction, almost imperceptible, as if he had placed a final piece on a board and liked the sound it made. Claire, my mother said, taking one step forward before Adrian moved just enough to block the center line between us. He did it without touching her, without raising his voice, without anything that could be called rude. Yet the message was unmistakable. Not 1 inch farther unless I allow it. My mother stiffened. Victor of course smiled. He always smiled when the room was most dangerous. I am relieved to see you are safe, he said, looking directly at me as if the last day had been a misunderstanding between reasonable adults. You had everyone terrified. I stared at him. At the immaculate coat. The controlled warmth in his voice. The perfect public concern still clinging to him like expensive cologne. I felt suddenly, vividly, the snow beneath my bare feet, the weight of the wedding dress dragging at my legs, the cold that had felt cleaner than his touch on my life. No, I said. You were not terrified. Victor's smile dimmed by 1 degree. My mother looked between us, already uneasy, already recalculating. Adrian said nothing at all. He simply stood there at my side, silent as stone and twice as immovable, while the winter air curled around all four of us. Victor slipped one hand into his coat pocket and tilted his head in that patient, practiced way he used when he wanted the world to think I was emotional and he was merely concerned. "Claire," he said, voice gentler now, "why do not you come home so we can discuss this privately?" I looked at him for one long second, then at my mother, then at Adrian beside me, whose presence felt less like pressure now and more like a line no one would cross unless I said so. And for the first time since I ran, I understood exactly what choosing my next words would cost. I looked at Victor and realized something cold and clean at the center of me had finally stopped shaking. Maybe fear burns itself out if you survive enough of it. Maybe truth simply gets tired of waiting politely in the corner, while everyone else lies in designer coats. The winter air slid through the open doorway sharp and bright, carrying the faint scent of snow and gasoline and evergreen from the dark line of trees beyond the drive. My mother pulled her coat tighter around herself, already uncomfortable, already regretting that the scene was not unfolding according to the script she had clearly imagined on the ride over. Victor, on the other hand, still looked composed. He always did. That had been part of the spell in the beginning. He never raised his voice, never looked rushed, never made messes in public. He simply rearranged the room until everyone else mistook his control for stability. "Come home," he repeated, softer now, as if gentleness could erase everything hidden underneath it. "This has gone far enough." I almost smiled then, not because anything was funny, because that sentence, more than any threat he could have made, reminded me exactly why I had run. Gone far enough. As if my fear had been dramatic. As if my escape had been rude. As if the real problem here was not the contracts in his study or the story he had fed to the press, but the inconvenience of my refusal. I took one step forward. Adrian moved with me without blocking me this time. Just near enough that I could feel the force of him at my side, silent and watchful and utterly still. It did not feel like being handled. It felt like being backed by something solid for the first time in too long. "I am not coming home with you," I said. My voice did not shake. That seemed to surprise all three of them. Victor recovered first. "Claire, you are exhausted. You are confused. Whatever this is, it does not need to happen on his front steps. His, not Adrian Hayes. Not your host. Not the man who found me half frozen in the dark and kept me alive. Just his." A subtle dismissal. A reminder to everyone listening that he intended to frame this as a misunderstanding between men, not a decision made by me. I felt Adrian register it beside me. He did not react. He did not need to. "No," I said again. "What does not need to happen is you pretending I disappeared because I am unstable." My mother inhaled sharply. Victor's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "Claire," she said. And there it was, that soft strained tone she used when she wanted to sound maternal without actually taking my side. "This is not the place." I turned to her then, and I think that hurt her more than if I had shouted. "Where was the place, Mother? At the church? In the bridal suite? On camera beside? The man I ran from?" Color rose beneath her makeup. "Do not be dramatic." The words landed exactly as they always had. Cool. Clean. Efficient. A silk knife. For years that phrase had made me smaller. More careful. More willing to doubt my own pain if it embarrassed the room. But tonight it did something different. Tonight it made me angry enough to stand straighter. "I am done being convenient," I said quietly. Silence followed that. The kind that feels expensive. Victor's mask shifted then, not cracking but tightening around the edges. "You are speaking from emotion," he said. "You have had a traumatic evening. If someone here has been influencing you—" "No one had to influence me," I cut in. "I read the contracts in your study. I saw the trust documents. I saw my name listed like an asset attached to a merger." My mother went still. Truly still. Victor did not. That was the most revealing part. He did not look confused. He did not look wounded. He looked annoyed. Only for a second. Then the concern returned, polished and camera ready. "You misunderstood private legal documents," he said smoothly. "This is exactly why I wanted to discuss things in person. You wanted to marry me before I understood them." His jaw tightened. Barely. But I saw it. And from the corner of my eye, I knew Adrian saw it too. "Claire," Victor said, lowering his voice as if intimacy might save him now. You are making accusations you cannot prove. Adrian moved then. Just one step. Not in front of me. Beside me. Equal line. Equal height. His voice when it came was quiet enough that everyone had to listen harder. Careful, Kane. Victor's attention shifted to him at last, and the air between them changed. Not loud. Not theatrical. Worse. Two men who understood power too well to waste it on volume. This does not concern you, Victor said. Adrian's expression did not move. A frightened woman was left in the cold and found on my road. It concerns me now. My pulse stumbled at the words. Not because of the claim in them. Because of the restraint. He was not posturing for my mother. Not performing for guards. He was stating a boundary like weather, law, gravity. Victor smiled without warmth. You found an opportunity and decided to keep it. Adrian's gaze sharpened. No, the single syllable cracked through the winter air harder than a shout would have. I found someone who chose freezing over standing beside you. That tells me everything I need to know. My breath caught. My mother looked between us as if the ground had tilted under her expensive shoes. Victor's composure held, but only just. He glanced past Adrian to me, and when he spoke again the charm was thinning. You are making a mistake. The truth was maybe I was. Walking away from a man like Victor never came with guarantees. Speaking in front of my mother, in front of Adrian, in front of all these witnesses and all this winter and all this consequence, felt less like triumph than stepping off a cliff and deciding to trust the dark not to swallow me whole. But some mistakes are cleaner than obedience. Some risks are holier than surrender. I lifted my chin and met Victor's stare. No, I said. The mistake was ever believing I belonged to you. The words hung there white in the cold between us. No one moved. Snow drifted softly across the drive, settling on the black hood of the sedan, on the stone steps, on the bare branches above us like the night itself was trying to quiet the world and listen. Victor looked at me for one long second, and I knew in that instant that whatever came next, the performance was over. He could not charm me back, could not shame me back, could not gently guide me into the version of myself that made his life easier. My mother pressed her lips together, already calculating headlines, donors, damage. Adrian stood beside me, silent and immovable, his presence warm against the knife edge of the cold. Then Victor gave a slow, deliberate nod, the kind a man gives when he cannot win the moment but refuses to concede the game. This is not finished, he said. Adrian answered before I could. No, he said softly. It is not. Victor held his gaze, then turned, guiding my mother back toward the car with a hand at her elbow she did not resist. The sedan door closed. The engine purred. Headlights swept once across the snow. Then the car curved down the drive and vanished beyond the gates into the dark. Only when the red glow of the taillights disappeared did I realize how hard my heart was beating. The open doorway still breathed winter into the hall. My hands had started shaking again. Not from fear exactly. From aftermath. From the body finally catching up to what the soul had already survived. Adrian gave a quiet order and the doors closed behind us, sealing out the night with a heavy final sound that echoed through the hall like a vow. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I felt his coat settle around my shoulders before I fully registered he had taken it off. Warm. Heavy. Carrying the faint scent of cedar, smoke, and cold air. I looked up at him. The hard line of his mouth had softened, but his eyes had not. They were still fixed on the doors, still tracking possibilities, still counting danger even now. He will come back, I said. Adrian finally looked at me then. At my face. At the tremor in my hands. At the wreckage and defiance and exhaustion I had carried onto his steps, and somehow kept carrying all the way through. His voice when it came was low enough to feel almost private. Let him, he said. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the coat around my shoulders before returning to my eyes. I found you in the cold once, Claire. I am not losing you to darkness again.